Hello everyone, and thanks for joining me. I'm going to tell you about an incident that happened on my return journey from my summer cruise destination. Hi, and thanks for joining me. I was on the Coventry Canal at the time. I had decided not to do any filming on my return, other than sort of casual filming, but I wasn't filming to make any videos specifically. And I had to pass through the Atherstone Locks. When you're heading in a sort of southerly direction, you go up through the locks as opposed to down. And I moored up in a similar position to that where I stopped when I was going through, virtually the same position in fact, ready for the following morning. The next morning I set off through the locks. There are 11 locks at Atherstone. The first lock that you go into is lock number 11, which is at the bottom of the flight. Lock 10 is pretty close by. Then you cruise a little way, then you get to locks 9 and 8, then there's another long pound between 8 and 7, and the remaining locks are much closer spaced. Anyway, I got through locks 11 and 10 okay, and as I was cruising up to lock 9, boaters coming down towards me were telling me that the pounds ahead, the 2 pounds ahead, were very low on water. I went into lock 9. I could see that between lock 9 and lock 8, which were very close, there was little water. People were saying make sure you stay in the centre. I went into lock 8, and nudged up against the top gate was an historic boat, and it had done that because it had a draft of 3 feet. The draft on my boat is 1 foot 7 inches, which is about half that of the historic boat, and he'd been a bit worried about using the lock landing in case there was insufficient water for the boat to float. So I came into the lock, and nudged right up against the gate was this historic boat. So I rose up through the lock. The boater then was able to bring his boat back a bit to allow the gate to be opened so that I could get out. And I said I would cruise up to the next lock and run some water through. When I came into the pound between locks 8 and 7, I would say the water was down about 15 inches from its normal level. You could see mud on the side, on the offside in particular. It was very low indeed, and it's quite a long pound. And I came along up to lock 7, and I myself was a little bit fearful as to whether I should use the lock landing or not, just in case. When you're by yourself and you get into trouble, it's obviously worse. If you've got someone to share it with, it's a different matter. So I did something I'd never done before. I decided to take my boat up to the lock gates. And it was at this time that I actually started to film. I hadn't been filming because I hadn't planned to, but I thought, no, this is an incident that could be of interest. So I started filming, and I took my boat right up to the lock gates. Fortunately, the lock was arranged in such a way that I could step off onto the lock side, as it were. But there was nowhere for me to tie off. I loosely looped my mooring line around the balance beam. That seemed to be the best thing to do. I opened the paddle rather gingerly because I wasn't sure what the rush of water would be like. I didn't want my boat to disappear. Hello! I didn't want my boat to disappear away from me, as it were. This boat just passing here, look. So I lifted up the paddle in the gate and let the water come out of the lock. And my intention was to empty the lock, take the boat in, and then run some water through into the pound. Meanwhile, the lady on the boat behind me had sort of come up and joined me, and we had a discussion. And then, because my boat had been pretty steady, I decided that I would open the paddle at the far end of the lock, which would then allow water from the canal to pass through the lock into the pound between locks 7 and 8. I've now lifted this paddle to allow water to run through the lock, then through the open paddle at the end. I'm doing it very gently because I'm still a bit worried about my boat. I hadn't planned to do any filming on my return journey, but the pound I'm in is extremely low. I would say it's 15 inches down from normal position and 12 inches down from recent position. There is a boat stuck in the lock behind me, the working boat that I passed earlier. So I've taken my boat right up to the lock gates. I've emptied the lock ahead of me very slowly, and now I've opened the far paddle, which is allowing water from the canal to run through this lock and then out into the water behind me. And I can see already that the water level is increasing. When I returned to the boat just now, what was a pile of mud just over here is fast disappearing. So it is working. I never expected this, I have to say. And I could see that the water level was rising, because where there was mud before, it was getting covered by water. I looked away for a moment and I looked back, and the mud had reappeared, and that told me that they had used lock 8. A boat had gone through, and obviously it needed more water to fill it. Just now I completely covered that mud over when I ran the water through. They've obviously operated the lock the other end, and a lot of water has gone down, so it's lowered the level again. And I found out later that they did have trouble getting the historic boat through that lock, but they did achieve it. Sometimes if that happens, you have to have the lock gates open and run water through from the canal and sort of flush the boat out, and I believe that's what they did. Meanwhile, I'm still waiting to get into lock 7. So anyway, eventually I empty the lock and I take my boat in. I'm just entering the lock now. The boaters from the boat behind are helping me. Did you see any lockies at all? No?
Nobody, of course.
No.
Sausage.
Just taking the boat forward. I'm worried about the boat shooting forward, but I'm now just about to nudge the gate. That's it. It's another hot day. Very hot indeed. And I thought I'd just recount this tale because we often hear about low pounds, and ideally it needed water to be run through from up above. I think we're nearly there now. When I eventually got to Top Lock, where there were volunteers, and mentioned the difficulties that there were with the low level of water in the pounds, they said it was the same right throughout, and that all the pumps were running to maintain the levels as they were, let alone increase them. It just wasn't going to happen. So I'm exiting this lock now. But I thought you'd like to see what occurred, and I hope I've explained it reasonably well enough. I did my best to film it. I was a bit late in the day doing so, but it does give an idea of what is involved when a pound is low on water and the procedure for running water through. I have shown this before, but this was a worse instance than what happened previously. I'm not sure if I said instance or incidents there. I sort of changed my mind while I was talking. This was a worse incident than the one previously that I did film last year on my Kilby Bridge trip. So I hope you've enjoyed watching that. All that remains for me to say is look after yourselves, your friends and families. Take the utmost care. If you haven't yet done so, please do think about subscribing and clicking the little button, or the little bell I should say, going a bit loopy aren't I, to receive notifications of future videos. All the very best to you. Bye for now.